Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Today on Ring of Fire, we'll find out how the labor movement can help save the middle class. We'll also tell you how Democrats can win big in the midterms by strengthening their Social Security argument, but they don't seem to have enough sense to do that right now. And we'll find out why the red states are falling so far behind the rest of the country, both economically and socially. We have all that and more coming up, but right now, remember, you just stepped into the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
The Republicans may historically have been the party of Lincoln, but the modern version of the party has absolutely nothing in common with the former president. Today, the GOP is all about limiting the rights of minorities. I'm joined now by David Haynes to tell us what's happening, not just to minorities, but to students and the elderly and the disabled, how they're being prevented from going to the voting polls. David, the Republicans are really in a fight for their lives right now. It appears that they simply don't have any alternatives other than to keep people away from the polls, suppress the vote. It's very clear. It doesn't have anything to do with crime or voter fraud. It has everything to do with the GOP's fear that they're going to be voted out of existence here as demographics change. You see,
if you don't have if you don't have the best candidates, then what else? And the best ideas, the better ideas. What's your other alternative? And suppose that's a decades-old strategy that they've employed, that they're ramping up again, and that's to try to keep certain voters and Democratic-leaning voters, as many people as possible, away from the voter box.
What tell us the new iterations. Give us some examples of what's happened throughout the country. It seems to me Georgia is really the big focus right now. Georgia is every day it's some new attempt to keep people from voting. How do you see what's happening up there?
Absolutely. Georgia, a lot of efforts there. North Carolina and Texas, those seem to be three of the hot spots, and they're rolling out the age-old impediments that they've used before, primarily the photo ID laws, whatever voter identification laws they can bring out. They're cutting in half or trying to eliminate early voting if at all possible. And basically any working folks, people that have a 9-to-5 job and may not be able to get out to the polls, why allow those folks to vote? Basically just trying to put whatever hurdles that they can. And you go back to the civil rights days, it's a lot of the tricks from the old playbook from back then.
Well, it's amazing how shameless they are about it. Governor Christie, of course, is in charge of the Governors Association here in the United States. The guy really should be behind bars by now, but he's still out there on the campaign trail. He's made some remarkably stupid statements to where it just basically shows what his intent and what the intent of the Republican Party is. Have you been following that?
Yeah, I think it was in Illinois recently. There's a highly contested governor's race there, and Chris Christie was there saying, surprise, now we have this same-day registrations being rolled out. And the thing is, research has shown that voter fraud is really de minimis, practically non-existent. And the Republicans try to use this farce as a reason why we should not have same-day registration. We should not have extended early voting periods. But it's just all pretextual. The bottom line is they don't want the will of the people to be heard. And so Chris Christie is right out in the front of this on behalf of the Republican Governors Association, trying to keep people away from the ballot box.
Okay, well, let's talk, though, about same-day registration. Why is that so important? In other words, you've got plenty of states around the country. North Dakota, my God, heavily Republican, red state. They use same-day voter registration, and it works for them. They say, we don't have any fraud here. And this is almost exclusively a Republican stronghold. And they say it's okay there. But the Republicans are more concerned on same-day registration where you have a hugely minority kind of population, apparently. That's not North Dakota. That's not a big minority area.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Many states that do employ same-day registration never had a problem. But the fight is happening in precincts like Fulton County and Atlanta, as you point out, where there's a huge fight there going on in the state legislature. And, of course, these are states, Georgia and our other Deep South states, who have a very difficult history. And because they're no longer subject to pre-clearance now, under the Shelby v. Holder decision. All of these bills are popping up in think tanks.
Okay, well, let's bank up. They're not. In other words, they're not subject to the court saying you may not do this. Before the U.S. Supreme Court ruled, and they said, and basically just gutted the Civil Rights Voting Act. Before that, these states couldn't do this. They couldn't push this thing through in the middle of the night on a Friday night, make it law, and then nobody knows about it till 2 weeks later. That's what we see happening right now. One thing that we see, Dave, isn't it that the 4 of the top 5 voting turnout states, 4 of the top 5 are same-day registration states. In other words, it increases voting. There's no question about that, is there?
There's not, and in addition to the early voting period and the same-day registration, I mean, the fact is, it's people have busy lives. You know, there's a lot going on, and until the day comes, if you need to register more than 30 days out, we know that it's voter turnout is going to be down. And the overall question, it should not be a partisan question, should it? The overall question is, do we want more people to vote or less? Do we want a responsive and representative democracy or not? And clearly, the Republicans do not.
And so, but in the past, they've kind of hidden. They've hidden that. You haven't had Chris Christie out saying we basically just don't want blacks to vote. I mean, you had that happen in Georgia. Christie's basically parroting that same thing using other words. But the point is that they're in the past they've covered that up. Now they seem shameless about saying this is why we're doing this, because we want to hold on to power, and if we let everybody vote, that's not going to happen. The latest statistic, I don't know if you saw it this week, 73% of the American population believes that the GOP is a failure in Congress. 73%, and so they know that they don't have a brand that works. And they know that it's what are the actual statistics? That wasn't there some statistic analysis that was done on voter fraud, and it was something like out of a billion ballots, there have been 300 or 31, I think. What is that statistic? Exactly.
I mean, it's de minimis. It's a fraction of 1,000th of a percent. But these are the anecdotal stories that they're using. If they, and usually they don't turn out to be true. And you're absolutely right. We've had some memorandum that's been leaked internally where essentially they're saying, they don't want blacks to vote. I mean, that's what a lot of this comes down to. And it's clear their purpose is clear that they want to.
David, it's not just blacks though. It's students in college. It's elderly. It's disabled people. It's African Americans, and it's Latinos, because they don't have any kinship with that group, apparently. It's not just a black and white issue here, is it?
Absolutely, it's not. I mean, that of course, really a lot of the origin from the civil rights era, but now, of course, those are all the groups that they want to try to suppress, essentially, and those are all identified as, more Democratic-leaning constituencies. And so the Republicans, as you've said many times, male, stale, and pale. I mean, that's who they want to vote. And frankly, they believe that they know what's best for the rest of the people, and they don't want the will of the people to be heard.
Well, tell us more about Georgia. You're going to talk about Georgia, and that seems to be the petri dish for everything that the Republicans are doing now. The idea is to change voting districts, basically change them to where they reduce the numbers of candidates, things like that. Tell us what's going on there.
Well, you have a pattern there that we're seeing in other states as well, is where they're through gerrymandering, which is, of course, the other important issue. I mean, here's how it starts off, right? Keep people away from the ballot box, win the races in the state legislatures. Then that's where you redraw and gerrymander the districts for Congress. Put the Democratic candidates off and the African American candidates, try to put them in one district. So that they have to run off against each other, and you have states like North Carolina and Georgia, where then you're left with one or two super, minority districts, so to speak. The predominantly African American districts or the Democratic-leaning districts, where you might have 2 Democratic Congress people in the state, and then you're going to have 7 or 8 safe Republican states. And so this is being fought on a precinct by precinct basis, but it percolates all the way up to D.C. and the control of Congress is going to be controlled by these particular issues, not the battle of ideas, and that's not correct.
Well, the interesting thing about it to me is, of course, I have no love for the Democrats or the Republicans. I apologize for that. But, the truth is the Democrats were warned about this, I think, 12 years ago. They said this is going to happen. It's going to be a state-by-state takeover to where they can gerrymander Democrats out of existence. And the Democrats, as usual, the dysfunctional leadership ignored that. The Republicans didn't ignore that, and that's why we're suffering through this today. David, thank you for joining us. We'll continue this story, of course, as the midterms approach. It's going to get worse. Thanks.
I'm afraid so. Thank you.
Midterm elections are right around the corner, and Democrats are worried that they might lose even more House seats. They have every reason to worry, and possibly even lose control of the Senate in November. They have every reason to worry because it's their fault. If they want to win, they need to recommit to their principles and work to strengthen Social Security net programs. Joining me now to explain how that should happen is Richard Eskow, host of The Zero Hour. Richard, what is it about the Democrats that makes them so dense where it comes to understanding what sells to the American public and what doesn't? I saw really an interesting article a couple of years ago where they kind of traced the bad policy decisions by Democrats, and they traced it all the way back to the idea of you have within the party what they call it's a nepotism. It is somebody gets in a leadership position. It may be a PR firm, a media firm, or let's get you elected kind of firm, and they just don't go away. But they have this history of making bad decisions one after another. Same thing we see happening with Social Security right now, isn't it?
Well, it sure is, because I think what we see in Social Security, a new poll makes it very clear, 90% of Democrats support registered Democratic voters, and might I add, likely voters. 90% of them support expanding Social Security. Now, in an off-year election, the job of the Democrats is to get their base excited and out to the polls, and yet they're doing nothing that will get their base excited and out to the polls. Republicans know how to do this, but Democrats don't. And then Democrats are always talking about, well, we've got to be moderate and conservative because we also want to appeal to Republican voters. Well, guess what? 73% of likely Republican voters want to expand Social Security too. So something else is at work here that prevents these guys from standing up for things that make sense and that'll help get them elected.
Well, not only that, but most Republicans aren't going to vote for a Democrat. It's this illusion that was created in the Bill Clinton days. Bill Clinton charmed everybody into believing that if we can just look like Republicans, they'll think the Democrat is Republican. I'm proud to say that I'm neither. I don't think you are either, from what I understand. But the point is, as we watch this unfold, we have this overwhelming public that says we want to make sure that not only Social Security is safe, but it's even expanded to protect us even more because of the baby boomer movement. So, but nevertheless, the Democrats are afraid to talk about it. As a matter of fact, you had a president, unbelievable, Obama coming out with a CPI argument on Social Security. Where in the hell, who advised him to do that? It's killing Democrats right now.
You know what, Mike? I'll admit to having been wrong about something. I said it would take the Republicans, that if the president put that cut in his budget, supposedly to please Republicans, it would take the Republicans a day to turn and stab them over it. I was so wrong, Mike. It took 15 minutes. 15 minutes later, you had Dave Camp out there saying this is a betrayal of seniors and a betrayal of the Social Security promise. This is how naive these guys are.
So you have politicians, Democrats, that have allowed Republicans to take over the talking point about how important Social Security is, even though it was the Republicans from the word go that have been trying to decimate Social Security. Did I get that right? I mean, is that an overstatement at all?
It's not in the least bit an overstatement. They tried to kill it when it was created. They've tried to kill it ever since. They tried to privatize it in 2005. Mike, after the 2005 attempt by the Republicans to privatize it, Democrats had a 20-plus point lead with the public on who will do more to protect your Social Security. By 2010, they had squandered it with all of Obama's talk about we need to be responsible and cut it. And do you remember that in 2012, when Social Security was brought up in a debate with Mitt Romney, Obama actually said, I suspect there's not much difference between my position and Romney's. Can you believe that? That's what we're dealing with.
I recall it. And now we have a Hillary Clinton, which is nothing more than an extension of Obama, which is no more than an extension of Bill Clinton, which is no more than an extension of every damn Democratic Wall Streeter that is now in office running for president. So now nothing really changes. As a matter of fact, Hillary Clinton is even awful on this topic because she was late to start talking about it. Because the Republicans jumped out and said, look what the Democrats did. They wanted to change CPI. They wanted to cut your Social Security, mom and pop. We're the Republicans. We're here to say that. And the irony is the Republicans started all of the cut the Social Security to begin with. The Democrats are so late to the game, they almost can't respond.
Well, that's why if the Democrats are out there saying we want to expand your Social Security, let's hear my Republican opponents say that, they could really do something about this. But Mike, I'll make you a bet right now. I will bet you that Hillary Clinton, when she finally declares for president, does not stand up and say, I'm for expanding Social Security because it is the only thing keeping millions of American seniors from poverty and giving them a lifetime of financial security. I'm willing to bet you whatever you say that she's not going to say that in her declaration speech.
Yeah, okay, so in 2010, the Democrats actually had something that they called the Senior Bill of Rights. It was a great talking point.
No, I got to correct you on that, Mike. It was the Republicans who had the Seniors Bill of Rights.
Excuse me. It was the Republicans had the Seniors Bill of Rights, but the Democrats were the ones that actually were talking about the need for Seniors Bill of Rights, except the very top. Except the president not talking about Senior Bill of Rights, not talking about we can do more for seniors, talking about we should cut seniors, we should cut money for seniors. Do you remember, Richard, they caught Bill Clinton in a film. I mean, he thought he was off stage, thought his mic was off, where he was talking to a Republican about the need to cut Social Security?
I actually don't remember that, but he said enough on mic to make my blood boil, so I can only imagine what he says when he thinks the mic is turned off.
Where does this come from? Where does it originate? This Obama stupidity on things like CPI. Where does that come from?
A lot of it goes back to the billionaire hedge funder Pete Peterson, who is Richard Nixon's Commerce Secretary, who has been now for 30, 40 years fighting to cut Social Security and Medicare, downsize government, lower taxes for the wealthy and for corporations. And back in the 80s, back in the 1980s, he met a young man he thought was a promising politician by the name of Bill Clinton in Arkansas. And he did a lot to support Bill Clinton's career. He did a lot to fund the DLC along with funding the Republican Party. He's been paying for these quote-unquote think tanks and these astroturf, as they call them, so-called grassroots groups like Fix the Debt. There have been a million of them. I lose track of it. It's like a hydra. You cut off one head, 8 more come up. But this guy, Pete Peterson, and some of his billionaire pals at Fix the Debt, who are big defense contractors, the big Wall Street CEOs like Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein, they've been the guys pushing this for 30, 40 years, and they've been saying to politicians like Bill Clinton and Hillary and everybody else, look, just go along
and
with us.
Obama.
And, for sure.
Yes.
No politician in history has gotten more Wall Street money than Barack Obama. People forget that. So, I think 2008 was a record-breaking year, the money that Obama got from Wall Street. So absolutely. And they just say, look, go work with us on this. And they've also worked into the media and sent the media to all sorts of training sessions where they convince them that Social Security and Medicare are unsustainable. It's been a long and very determined campaign.
Yeah, okay, so here we are, and the only Democrats that seem to have any sense about what's going on seem to be people like Tom Harkin and Sherrod Brown, Elizabeth Warren. They're out there saying, hell yes, we need to we need to have a safety net for the elderly and the disabled in this country. All the other Democrats are out there saying, oh, gee whiz, we can't do that because we'll alienate the center. We have been losing with that idea for a long time now. And my prediction is we're going to see it right in through the midterms. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Republicans take the Senate, continue to control the House. What's your quick take in about 20 seconds?
Off-year elections aren't won by convincing the unconvinced, because like you say, there aren't too many of them. Off-year elections like this one are won by turning out your base. If you don't get your base excited, and they're not so far, they're going to really be in for a bruising.
Why should they be excited about the Democrats right now? That's the question. Richard Eskow, thank you for joining me, okay?
Always a pleasure.
Richard Eskow is host of The Zero Hour. We need to take a break, but we'll be right back. I'm Mike Papantonio. You're watching Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. It's no secret the Republican policies are bad for the American public almost exclusively these days. If you need hard evidence, just take a look at the Deep South. On everything from economic issues to social issues, the Republican-controlled South is a warning to the rest of the country about the dangers of Republican policies. Joining me now to talk about that is Howard Nations. Howard, a friend of mine, Thomas Frank, wrote a book, What's the Matter with Kansas, many years ago. Now, it seems like it must have been 11, 12 years ago. It's been around a long time. And he tried to understand what in the world is happening to Kansas because you had this problem where they had one of the lowest economic mobility problems. They had one of the lowest education problems. They had minimum wage problems. They had health problems. They stacked up in the United States as being just a dismal place to live. And he decided that what was happening is those people in Kansas wanted to vote for guns and God in cultural issues and basically to hell with their children. You see that happening in almost across the board in the South, in the solid South right now, don't you?
We absolutely do see that happening in the South. There have been a lot of studies on that recently. But, frankly, the starting point of it, as far as I'm concerned, is that they are solidly Republican. And this is how the Republicans choose to govern. They cut budgets, they oppose the minimum wage, they oppose labor unions, they refuse federal aid, and they oppose everything that supports the poverty safety net. For example, in Texas, our governor and several other governors are refusing health care, Medicaid for the poor. And Texas has the largest uninsured health care population in the country, but we're refusing federal funding that would pay 90% of it. Why? Political reasons, solely to make Obamacare fail. But the answer to the question is, why is it still the same? Republicans use the poor as political pawns. They place politics above people and the poor. They manipulate the voting rules. They disenfranchise the poor voters and the young. And they gerrymander the districts to assure their own reelection to make sure it stays that way. Now,
it's a
winning.
To
let the Democrats off the hook, though.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
When the Democrats did exactly the same thing when they were in charge in the South, and the reason for that is simple. It's the same people. It's the white male leadership in the South that has always run the small businesses and been in charge in the South. They switched to the Republican Party after the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Act were passed. So it's the same, regardless of whether it's Democrats or Republican, because it's the same people.
If you go back and look at the 60s, you had that the kind of what they call the business elite,
right?
Which, as you described, were small to large business owners that had direct interest in trying to keep people stupid, not pay wages, accomplish a lot of, not have unions, a lot of things you just talked about.
Right.
And so all they've done is they've taken the D that used to be behind their name, and now they've put an R there, and it's the same thing. One thing that I saw a great article in Salon.com about the Dixieland dilemma, and it was kind of the same thing that Thomas Frank was talking about, and that is, why do people allow it? Why does somebody in the South allow themselves to be paid the lowest wage per capita, to have no minimum wage increase at all, to have education just absolutely dysfunctional to where kids don't even finish school, and if they finish school, they're not equipped for anything else, to where they're not able to organize for things like collective bargaining. They're willing to allow their environment to be just totally trashed by whoever wants to trash it. Why does that happen, and what's the reaction? And Thomas Frank said kind of the same thing Salon.com said, and that is that a lot of these people have such a religious background that they believe that simply praying to God is going to change all that. That's where they find their power, in their prayer. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all find power in prayer. But you don't change politics through prayer. And the other thing that they find power in is owning the gun. And so Thomas Frank says, why do they gravitate to those two things? And it is because they're powerless everywhere else. What's your take on that, Howard?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And this all goes back, Pap, to the Southern strategy. It goes all the way back to Nixon. After the Civil Rights Bill, and then in 1969, when Nixon came along, he was getting absolutely no support from the South at all. So he had to figure out a way to tap into exactly what you're talking about. So the Republicans adopted a phony platform that they didn't believe in, but they tapped into the anti-federalism, they tapped into the pro-gun, they tapped into the high level of religious and the anti-union sentiments that take place in the South, and they successfully converted Democrats to Republicans, not just the leaders, not just the white male leaders, but the entire South, by tapping into those exact things you're talking about.
These numbers that we're talking about, as far as, we're not just making this up, they looked at the extensive studies, and it wasn't just, it was the Department of Agriculture. They measure poverty, for example. It was 2 or 3 universities, and they looked at Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, Georgia, South Carolina. Oddly enough, North Florida, too, was included in all that. And so what they found is it's a common ground issue. The common ground is they're willing to sit at a table with their family and say to little Johnny, it's okay that you're not educated because we have our guns. They're able to say to their wife, it's okay that you don't have equal protection as a female in this state because we have the right to religion, as if that was going to be tested anyway. So they have this notion that there's power in those two things, in owning handguns, and that the power of prayer is going to solve everything. And you have these characters that you're describing, they used to be Democrats and now they're Republican, that have these people under their thumb with that, don't they? They control them with those two things. They hustle them with those two things. They lie to them with those two concepts. And it's very effective, isn't it?
It's extremely effective. And the result of it is that across the South, you have the highest poverty in the country. This is a ridiculous figure. 25% of children in the South live in poverty. That's an amazing statistic. And when they say the South on that one, they're talking about a 2,500-mile area from Arizona all the way over to South Carolina. And here's the other reason, if you get right down to it. When we're talking about the people, the large level percentage of poverty, only 15 to 20% of those people are white. The 80 to 85% are minorities. And so in the South, they won't pass a minimum wage. They're totally against it. And the reason is because the business model in the South for businesses is low wage.
It's a Saipan model, which is
totally.
Basically no wages, and employer calls all the rules. Employees have nothing to say about how they're treated, basically.
Exactly. And
that was launched by the Waltons, right? I mean, that's where we started seeing
exactly. It. Very successfully by the Waltons, incidentally.
Yeah.
They also have the lowest economic mobility. You know, the politicians espouse the American dream. Work hard and you can climb the economic ladder. But statistically, it's just that. It's a dream, because the poor cling to this hope of eternal life that you're talking about. And this is why a lot of the minorities celebrate death, because they're going on to a greater life. They've just resolved themselves that they're not going to get anything here. There is no economic mobility out of the South for minorities particularly, and they're never going to get out as long as we allow the business models to remain the same and be based on low wage work and not past minimum wages.
In other words, Howard, you're saying that they've given up. They've been beat down to the point they've given up. And the two things they won't give up is this fear that somebody's going to take their religion and this fear that somebody's going to take their gun. Both of them absolutely ridiculous, but they buy into it anyway. A lot of it's self-imposed. There's very little what we can do about it sometimes. Howard Nations, thank you for joining me, okay?
My pleasure, Mike.
For decades, Republicans and corporate leaders have been trying to pass tort reform, a cap on the amount of damages that can be recovered when a consumer is injured. In California, they succeeded in enacting medical malpractice caps a few years ago, but now consumers are fighting back. They're finally awake to what's happened to them. Joining me now to discuss the fight against unfair tort reform measures is Anne-Marie Murphy. Anne-Marie, I remember when the American public was told those horrendous lies about what was going to happen, all the positive, all the good that was going to happen if they would simply give up their rights to be able to go to courtroom and be judged by a jury, if they'd give up their rights to damages, if they'd give up their right to be able to sue when somebody hurts them by way of malpractice. We heard, if you recall, I remember coming out of California, we heard it all throughout the country, that insurance rates were going to drop if you would simply give up your rights to lawsuits, voters, that doctors would quit moving out of places like California. And now we have this history behind us, and we see all that was a lie. We see insurance rates didn't drop. We see there's no difference in the number of people moving into medicine. It was completely a lie that was perpetuated mostly by a media that was too damn stupid to look beyond what they were being told. California finally sees it, don't they?
Californians are understanding what's going on, and I have faith that come November, an important series of reforms is going to be passed by Californians at the ballot box to partly correct what happened back, and you're referring to what happened in California in 1975. A law was passed that put caps on pain and suffering damage in medical malpractice cases. That cap was set at $250,000, and it never increased, not even a penny between 1975 and 2014.
Okay, so what you had, let me just get this right. The voters in California were told that if you are horrendously injured, if your wrong leg is cut off, if you are blinded, if your child is born with permanent brain damage, whatever it may be, if you will simply give up your rights to be able to sue, your insurance rates are going to go down, and there's going to be more doctors in California. Now we see 30 plus years, that was a lie. That was completely, utterly a lie.
Absolutely untrue. It was an absolute lie, because when that cap was passed in 1975, the cost of medical malpractice insurance didn't change. It stayed exactly the same. So that's proof positive that residents of California were sold a bill of goods back when the law was passed in 1975. In fact, medical malpractice rates didn't change until legislation was passed in 1988 that provided for greater state of California oversight over the setting of those insurance rates. That's when the rates started to decrease. It had nothing to do with the cap on damages that was passed in 1975.
Interesting studies came out both from the JMA, the Journal of American Medicine, several Lancet, several important journals, along with just some independent university studies that said that California's healthcare doctors had become so lackadaisical about the way they treated patients because they knew there was no downside. If they blind you in surgery or if they cut off the wrong foot, they really didn't have much to worry about. They worried about $250,000 cap. They didn't worry about ever being asked to leave the profession. They didn't worry about having to be drug tested. They didn't worry about any kind of reprimand from the medical association. It was a free ride for these doctors, and you had malpractice taking place in California almost as bad as we do in Florida, almost as bad as it is in Mississippi and Alabama, and these places that where people were sold this bill of goods that if they'll give up their rights to go to court and seek redress, then insurance rates are going to drop and there's going to be more doctors out there. What an incredible lie.
Absolutely. And it's gotten so bad that if you are an injured patient in California, there's almost no chance that you're going to be able to exercise your right to a jury trial because of this terrible cap that's been in place for 3 decades. it's 4 decades actually. It's economically not feasible to bring a lawsuit on behalf of an injured patient in California. And it's every single year that this law stays on the books and unchanged, it becomes harder and harder for patients to find an attorney who is able to take a medical malpractice case. Now the exception, and there's a perverse set of incentives at play here. The only case that can be taken is if you have a high wage earner, head of household who's injured, and then the damages for their lost income may be high enough. But that's a sliver of cases. The people that are harmed are the homemakers, whether they be men or women, the senior citizens, the children who are the victims of medical negligence. Those cases have become very near to impossible to litigate in the courts.
Well, you know, the worst thing about it is that when you look at the numbers in every state, we know in Florida that it is a tiny, tiny number of doctors that repeatedly cause all the malpractice. Most doctors don't engage. I mean, they don't create malpractice. It's a tiny bunch of the doctors, and the problem is in most states that the board in that state, the medical board, won't say, you know what, Bobby, you get one more shot, and then after one more shot, we're going to take your license away, or you're going to have some other rules that you have to operate under. They don't even have drug testing in most states. They're, in California now, you're moving towards a mandatory drug test for doctors. Is that right?
Absolutely. We are hopeful it's going to be passed this November as part of the initiative that I mentioned. The initiative will it'll address the problem with the cap on damages, but it'll also do 2 other very common sense things. One, it will require doctors to be randomly drug tested. There's a high prevalence of drug abuse, drug and alcohol abuse in the medical profession. Now, like you said, most doctors are good doctors, but there is a segment of doctors who have succumbed to various types of abuse issues, and they shouldn't be doing things like conducting surgeries while they're under the influence. So that would be addressed by the initiative, as would a very common sense database to track the use of narcotic prescriptions. Now, the database would track the use of these high-risk medicines by patients generally in California. It would require cross-checking before something like oxycodone is prescribed.
Because you have pill mills out in California, just like they have in California and all over the South, just like doing Florida and really all over the South. The pill mills have become an industry in the Deep South right now, and I know you're aware of that. But in California, you have I think there was a bill that it emerged out of the idea of these children being killed by somebody who had been overprescribed OxyContin. In the process, they're driving, that person's driving and he kills 2 children. And so out of that comes this bill to where you don't allow for doctor bill mills anymore. This is going to stop that. Is that right?
Absolutely. We owe this initiative that's on the ballot to somebody named Bob Pack. He is a successful businessman in Silicon Valley, and tragically, he lost his son, Troy, who was 10 years old, and his daughter, Alana, who was only 7, in an automobile accident where the driver of the car had doctor shopped within a Kaiser hospital. She had gone from doctor to doctor to doctor and wound up with thousands of pills in her possession, painkiller pills, and she was under the influence of those medications when she killed Mr. Pack's 2 children.
So that's going to be included in this. Again, it's not, most doctors are not pill mills, but in Florida we have a very small number of them that are. This kind of legislation needs to take place all over the country. We need to reverse this ridiculous tort reform that takes people's rights away. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
The only way to rebuild the middle class is by creating jobs that pay a livable wage. And recently, the American labor movement has been given a much-needed boost by the willingness of workers to finally stand up against unfair labor practices, especially in the fast food industry. Joining me to talk about how the labor movement can help revive our middle class is Michael Burg. You know, Michael, as labor unions have become really almost things of the past because of conservatives really trying to destroy labor, collective bargaining, and destroy organized labor so they could make more money. What we've seen is it replaced by kind of but it's fight for 15. I think is a good way to describe it. Fight for 15 is, of course, all of the workers that work at places like McDonald's and fast food restaurants that have said, you know what, I'm just tired of it. I'm going to take to the streets and we're going to change something. Is that the new labor movement in this country right now?
Well, I think it is, Mike. I think, well, you know, when you look at it, one of the problems we have here is you can have two people who are working at those jobs with a family who can't get over the poverty level. When you're making $10 an hour, and it's bad for the economy, and what's crazy is these conservatives who refuse to vote for the raise of the minimum wage, it's hurting the economy at so many different levels. It hurts it at the first level it hurts it at is most of these people need assistance because they can't make a wage in which they can live upon. So it hurts that way. It hurts. Go ahead.
In other words, you've got them working at McDonald's and they're living on subsistent wages. They're living on the poverty line. So all the other taxpayers have to come in and they have to be able to give them a safety net so they can work at McDonald's and McDonald's can make a big profit. Isn't that kind of the scenario?
Absolutely. That's the first problem. The second problem is there's no hope. If you're working a full-time job, and you have both you and your spouse working full-time jobs at minimum wage jobs, and you can't live on it, there's no hope. And so a lot of those people say, why am I doing that? Why am I even working? Because there's nowhere to go. There's no raises. There's no way to get a quality of life, to have hope for those people. And so that's the second problem. And the third problem is if they're making more money, and you give them a wage in which they can live on, they can put money back into the economy by buying goods.
Yeah, capitalism requires that, doesn't it, Michael? If you dry up money in the economy, then I think you and I did a story maybe a couple of weeks ago where you were talking about the fact that at this point there's somewhere around $18 trillion that has moved outside the economy. It's either in banks offshore, or it's being held by the gazillionaires in this country, and it's not moving into the capitalist system, and that destroys capitalism. But let me ask you this: even though the federal government has been just woefully, just terribly dysfunctional on this issue, we've seen localities and we've seen states. We've seen Los Angeles and New York and Seattle, San Francisco. We've seen some of these places take the law into their own hands and change the minimum wages, haven't we?
They have, and that is the thing that I think gives us some hope, which is I know in Seattle there was a huge vote of whether or not to take that up to $17 per hour, and they voted for it, and it went in, and it was overwhelmingly passed by the citizens who understand the problem. You know, it's the politicians may not, but we've seen that in those places you've talked about, and so there is some hope.
Virtually every time it's been put up for a vote to the American public, whether it's a locality like Los Angeles or whether it's New York or Oakland, California, these places where they're moving the minimum wage up to $13, $14, $15 an hour with a step up on cost of living increases. Every time it's been put to the public, do you want to do that? The public has said yes. It's almost as if the public has more sense than the people making the laws, and the public in those localities are the people who have been pushing it in demanding that these legislators or these commissioners or these councilmen take action. It hasn't been driven so much from the top, has it?
No, in fact, it's not been driven at all from the top. And what's crazy about it is that these companies, the McDonald's, the Burger Kings, all the fast food, Walmart, they're fighting it tooth and nail, which is really, really, really horrible, because they're the ones who potentially are going to benefit by having increased wages for these people who then are able to go in and buy their products and go out and do it. But it's, again, what we talked about, greed. It's greed by the companies, and it's also the money in politics from these giant corporations that are getting the politicians in Washington, D.C. and in state legislatures to refuse to raise the minimum wage.
Well, one thing, again, we start talking about how the labor movement has been decimated in this country. That's something that labor movement used to take care of. That's where we had a middle class. They'd said, we don't want just to talk about minimum wage. We want to talk about sick leave. We want to talk about time off. We want to talk about overtime. We want to talk about the ramifications of you doing wage theft on our workers. That's what unions used to do. And now what we're finding is in some of these places like Seattle or Los Angeles or Oakland, they're actually having to pass laws to try to get to that. I mean, not just on minimum wage, but things on like sick leave, things like on days off, things like on what happens to a worker if they start to an employer if they start trying to steal workers' money. But it's upside down. We used to see that happening from the top. We used to have leadership in Washington that would say, you know what, we know, we've looked at the statistics, we know that if you, this is interesting to me. I know it is, we've talked about this before, but in every jurisdiction across the country where they have increased minimum wages, the economy has increased 2, 3, 4% better than the rest of the country. I mean, I don't know what kind of more statistics they need to understand what's happening here.
But I think quite honestly, it's not the economy they care about. It's that 1%. It's the giant corporations of the world who want to squeeze every dollar out of the worker. Not only are we talking about making sure that people aren't working overtime and not getting paid, but even safe working conditions, making sure that people are compensated fairly. They want to squeeze every dollar. It's like taking a sponge and taking that worker as a sponge and wringing it and wringing it and wringing it until your sponge can't do anything anymore because you've squeezed everything out of it. That's the problem. That's what's going on. The corporations are doing it. And I think the good news is that when you see what's going on when they put it to a vote, is that I think we're going to see hopefully a pendulum swinging back in which we're going to try to create unions. And we know there was the fast food workers walked out. They had a nationwide walkout. And
in other words, you're going to see the country closing down fast food workers, taxi cab drivers, people who say we want to have some voice but we can't unionize. This is the way that we're going to deal with it. Incredible number of 130,000 from all across the country walked out just recently, fast food workers, and people paid attention to that. I don't know that McDonald's did. I don't know that it changes the way McDonald's does business or any of the other, whether it's Walmart, the big box stores, the fast food organizations. Their idea, as you say, is to keep squeezing until there's nothing left. And that's basically where it's headed for the American worker right now, isn't it?
It is, and that's why I think people who are watching this, they need to stand up and they need to shout, you know what, this is not right. It's not right for those workers. These are people who are working. These are people who are trying to get their family so they can buy food and clothes and be able to move their family with some hope and still have the American dream. And these giant corporations are just stepping all over them and keeping them down.
And understand, as you think about this, it's killing capitalism. That's what everybody misses. If you love capitalism, this has to stop. Thanks a lot for joining me, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Are you ready? The Pap Attack.
I saw another one of those commentaries where the Democratic talking head is explaining how difficult it is for a Democrat to win in the new Republican South. So reorganization ideas like the Blue South Project pop up about every year with that new plan to reinvigorate Democrats in the solid red states like Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, South Carolina. Seriously? Yeah, it's not complicated. It's not a complicated problem. Just be patient. Just wait. Demographic shifts will be the only thing that reinvigorates Democrats in the South. Racist, angry, old white men and women Well, they finally have to give up the ghost. Minority voters, they have to begin taking voting more seriously. Time to cure the problem. The sound of dueling banjos and rebel yells are not far, hopefully, from being a distant memory. If you're like me, you're pretty tired of listening to Democratic leadership moan and complain about how the Democrats have lost the Deep South. Yes, it is a fact that moony-eyed evangelicals, NASCAR dads, and moms will barely understand how badly they've put this country in jeopardy by constantly, predictably, reliably swallowing the Republican bait like croaker fish every time the Republicans throw a new line in the water. They'll do it again this year, to the tune of about 70%. That is the solid white South. But so what? Progressives absolutely don't need the Deep South to control Congress, the Senate, or the White House. Progressives and the Democratic leadership in particular is spending way too much time trying to lure Deep South Walmart Republicans away from their tractor pulls, Krispy Kreme donuts, and reality trash TV, and the unshakable grip of America's most fraudulent TV evangelists like Pat Robertson. The answer is let it go. Get over it. Elvis has left the building, but that's okay. I don't believe anyone explains the wisdom of that kind of political strategy better than Chuck Thompson, who wrote a book entitled Better Off Without Him. It's a book about political strategy that most Democratic leaderships will probably not have enough sense to read. But if they did, they'd see that Chuck makes a common sense argument that maybe even Democratic leadership can get their mind around. That is that the South will never love you. Hell, they don't even like each other down there. Think about it this way. In 2004, after it was abundantly clear to that solid 85% white vote that their anointed good old boy Bush had lied to them about Iraq, sent their sons, daughters, fathers, mothers off to war based on lies, even after that, outsourced their jobs to the tune of $20,000 a month, giving them a $300 tax rebate at the same time that he gave his millionaire oil buddies $300,000 caliber tax breaks on their personal returns. And to add to that, he stifled their Home Depot, Walmart wages to a 2% increase over 4 years. He took away their Social Security nets that the South relies on more than any other part of the country. Well, you get the picture. Voting in states like Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Louisiana for white folks isn't really a function of common sense. As they love to say down here, voting is no-brainer. It has special meaning down here. So abandon the Deep South, save yourselves, leave this small handful of progressives here to fend for ourselves. We'll be just fine. Go save the rest of the country. But please quit telling us that only a Southern Democrat can run for president. Obama shattered that goofy idea. And for damn sure, quit dressing up Democrat buffoons like Joe Manchin from West Virginia in a way that tries to pander to Pat Robertson, Walmart Republicans, in hopes that Democrats can turn the tide in the South by disguising what progressives stand for. We are what we are. Be proud of it. That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringofireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.